meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Status of Women. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. And so for members on Zoom, you'll be using the raised hand function, and the order of speaking is displayed on the screen in the participant list. Remember to mute your mic when you're not speaking. Today, the committee is...
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I think staff cannot hear. If we can check sound.
Oh.
Everything is okay?
Can you hear me?
Yes, and I do see the list of staff and the attendees. It appears to be okay. Please let us know if they cannot hear. And we are looking into it on our side. Please proceed.
Okay, very good. And so today we have our panel on pay equity. And so I'm very happy to have from the Human Rights Commission, Karen Jensen, and also Jeff Wilbond, the Director General of Proactive Compliance. And so I don't know how long you have for opening remarks. I'm willing to give each of you 5 minutes, which is our standard, but if you want to speak together for that 5, that's fine as well. And so we'll begin right away and start with you, Ms. Jensen. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to you, Madam Chair, the Vice Chairs, and the Honourable Committee members. Is the sound okay? Let me just check that first. Good. My name is, as you know, Karen Jensen, and I am Canada's first Federal Pay Equity Commissioner. With me today is Jeff Wilbond, Director General of the Proactive Compliance Branch of the Canadian Human Rights Commission. I'd like to begin by acknowledging with gratitude the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, from whose traditional and unceded territory I'm speaking today. I'm honored to be asked to speak with you today about why now is the right time for pay equity in Canada, and to fill you in on the work that the Pay Equity Division of the Canadian Human Rights Commission is doing to prepare for the coming into force of the Pay Equity Act. Since being called to the bar in 1994, I have been involved in representing employees, unions, and employers in lengthy, contentious, and extremely costly pay equity litigation. I saw personally the toll the pay equity litigation took on all those involved, and believe therefore very strongly in the benefits of Canada's move to a proactive pay equity system. That's why I was deeply honored to be appointed Federal Pay Equity Commissioner in October of 2019. I truly believe that pay equity is an important building block for Canada as it moves to build back better from the pandemic. As we know, COVID-19 has exposed our vulnerabilities and our inequalities. Women have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, especially racialized women, Indigenous women, migrant women, women with low income, single mothers, LGBTQ+ women, and women with disabilities or mental health issues. Women workers in Canada were hit first by the pandemic, and they're feeling the impact the longest. In November of 2020, RBC Economics reported that the pandemic had rolled back the clock on about 3 decades of women's progress in the labour market, setting Canada's economy up for a slower recovery than would otherwise be the case. Closing the gender pay gap is essential to our country's economic and social recovery, and it is essential for Canadian workers. Cette période que nous vivons est difficile.
This is a painful time for many businesses. For those concerned about bringing in this legislation at this time, it should be noted that there is a growing body of evidence that demonstrates how paying women equally for work of equal value to men's work is good for business. For example, the Harvard Business Review recently highlighted research showing that in regions like North America,
If you can check on the translation, and also if the staff is still having difficulty, most of them are reporting they can hear, but if they do have difficulty, they can call the phone lines and they'll address their issue.
Madam Chair, staff can hear now. Thank you.
Very good.
Donc, je vais recommencer.
I will begin my sentence once again. The Harvard Business Review recently highlighted research showing that in regions like North America, the most talented individuals prefer to work in companies that foster diversity. Pay equity is a tool in promoting gender diversity in companies. It will assist companies to attract top talent, which will in turn assist them to outperform their peers.
Preparing for the new legislation coming into force, I have conducted extensive consultations with unions, employers, women's organizations, and employer associations to identify any concerns they may have and to find out how we could best address them. In response to the needs identified by stakeholders, the Pay Equity team is developing educational materials, guidance documents, and concrete tools that will assist the workplace parties to implement the Act. We are working closely with stakeholder groups to ensure these tools work well for employers and employees. Communication about the new legislation is key to our success. My goal as Commissioner is to demystify pay equity and help employers to see that it is a golden opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to gender equality in the workplace. The economic conditions for women are perilous right now and need to be addressed. Pay equity is one tool among many that will make a concrete difference in the economic reality of many women and help us as a nation to benefit from the full participation of women in the workplace. I welcome your questions. C'est donc avec plaisir que je peux répondre.
It is with pleasure that I'll answer your questions. Thank you.
Jeff, are you going to speak as well?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just to simply say, because I respectfully wanted to give the floor and the time to Commissioner Jensen, but I too am in a brand new role for the Canadian Human Rights Commission. It's the first time we've had a Director General responsible for proactive compliance, which brings under a single umbrella two program areas. So for pay equity and the Accessible Canada Act, I'm responsible for those two pieces of legislation with respect to compliance and enforcement. And so that's a new mandate for the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And we are very proud and pleased to have and deliver on the work that's important for Canadians moving forward. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Excellent. Then we'll begin our rounds of questioning, 6 minutes each, beginning with Ms. Wong for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for having the two witnesses with us. So, you know, I either one of you can answer my questions. So just now you did mention that Ms. Jensen's job started October 2019, but then the Pay Equity Act actually is much earlier. So, what percentage of portion of complaints filed with your organization involve gender-based pay discrimination? And also, I have a second question. As a member of Parliament for Richmond Centre, which is very, very diversified, I have a large population of ethnic constituents. Does the gap change at all when we look at ethnic women specifically? So 2 questions for both of you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for that question. I will address the first question, which is whether or not there have been any complaints filed. So as the member rightly pointed out, the legislation is, I was appointed in October of 2019, which was approximately a year after the proactive pay equity legislation was passed in Parliament, which was December of 2018. The Act is not yet in force, and we are anticipating that the Act will come into force later on in 2021. And so at this time, all complaints regarding pay equity are filed under the Canadian Human Rights Act, and that's Section 11 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. And we do know that from 2010 until the present time, there have not been a great number of complaints filed. In fact, there are only about 19 complaints that were filed regarding pay equity during that time period. And of those, and in fact, I think it's only 17 of those, 17 complaints filed. Of those, there are only 9 that are proceeding, and those are largely dealing with public service institutions. So once the Act comes into force, it will apply to all employers with 10 or more employees, which is about 4,500 employers across Canada, covering about 1.3 million employees. Now, the member has properly asked or put forward an interesting question with respect to the levels of discrimination, pay equity discrimination for ethnic women. And indeed, we know that the pay equity gap is different depending on the characteristics of the women and whether women are characterized by intersectional identities. So we know that in general, the wage gap is 89 cents. That is, women earn 89 cents on the dollar earned by men in Canada globally. However, racialized women working full-time earn an average of 67 cents only on the dollar earned by non-racialized men. Indigenous women, on the other hand, earn approximately 65 cents on the dollar for every male dollar, non-Indigenous male dollar. Newcomer women, it's 71 cents on the male dollar. And disabled women living with physical or mental disabilities are earning only approximately 54 cents on the dollar earned by every male who is non-disabled. So yes, indeed, there is a differential impact of wage discrimination depending upon the identity of the women involved.
Thank you very much for that part. And my next question is, I'm now applying my seniors lens. Well, all of us know that we live longer and women live longer, and then they are still very very active, even though they are, considered to be seniors. And of course, WHO has a totally different definition of seniors now. You can only be, officially called a senior when you reach the age of 80. So I'm not extending that far. So does age factor into the pay gap at all?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. Indeed, the Pay Equity Act applies to all federally regulated workplaces, and to the extent that older women find themselves in federally regulated workplaces and are continuing to work, yes, they will be most certainly eligible for pay equity adjustments should that be found to be necessary within a given workplace. And we do know that mandatory retirement is no longer permissible. So in fact, the average working age has increased. And so there are of course more women working in the workforce now later on into life, myself included, and are proud to be doing so. So those women, if they are working within predominantly female job classes in a federally regulated workplace, will be part of the pay equity study. And if the value of their work compared to the value of predominantly male work is comparable, and they are being paid less than the men who are doing comparable work, yes, they will most certainly be eligible for pay equity related increase in their wages.
Very good. And now we'll go to Ms. Sidhu for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for joining us today, Ms. Jansen. I was a member of the Pay Equity Committee, so I'm really looking forward to the work that you will be doing, and I was proud to vote for this alongside the member of the Liberal Caucus, despite the nay vote from the opposition for the Budget Implementation Act. So my question is this: when the Pay Equity Act is fully implemented, it will be the country's first proactive pay monitoring system. Under the old system, it was complaint-based. Women had to have proof they have subject to discrimination, and they had to bring forward the complaint, which risked retaliation from their employers. Soon, federally regulated industries will need to self-report on their pay data, which will be hopefully lead to a more transparent process. Can you tell us what you see the effect of the new system being in the long and short term?
Yes, indeed, I'm happy to do that. Madam Chair, I would just like to clarify that, in fact, the federal legislation is really the third proactive piece of pay equity legislation in the country. Both Quebec and Ontario have had proactive pay equity legislation for some time, but this is the first piece of proactive pay equity legislation in the federal jurisdiction. And as the member has rightly pointed out, it has been a long time coming, and we are very happy to see that the complaint-based process has been replaced with a proactive process that puts the responsibility on the shoulders of the employers to undertake an analysis to determine whether or not there's a pay gap. It's not dependent any longer on women and unions to come forward and raise complaints and concerns about the pay equity system. We anticipate that there will be significant benefits to this legislation. Aside from the obvious benefit of increasing the wages of women in federally regulated workplaces where there is found to be inequities, there are numerous other advantages in terms of the impact that this can have on women and indeed on all of society. A study that was done in Ontario on their pay equity, proactive pay equity legislation, revealed that there were a number of sort of psychosocial benefits that resulted from pay equity, proactive pay equity legislation. Increased self-esteem among female workers, increased retirement savings available to women when they retired. There was an increase in the financial security of single mothers, and there were increased retention rates among female employees in workplaces. And I really want to underscore that last point, that in fact, pay equity has tremendous benefits for the business community. And I'm pleased that in my outreach efforts, I'm seeing businesses recognize this, that when an employer undertakes a pay equity analysis and communicates to its employees that it cares very much about gender equality in the workplace, that has enormous benefits for the business itself. There's quite a bit of research that I alluded to in my opening remarks that suggest that those businesses that promote gender equality are in fact more productive, more resilient, and better at competing in the marketplace. So I think pay equity has been established really to be good for business, good for workers, and good for the economy, in the sense that paying women a fair wage for the work that is done, we know will increase the buying power, the household buying power, and that will also fuel the economic recovery. So the more that women are able to participate equally in the workforce, increase their economic power and independence, the better we all are. And of course, this will also have an impact on the children in Canada, and that's important to note as well.
Thank you for the explanation, Ms. Jansen. We know that the pay inequality is not just a matter of gender. The average working woman in Canada makes 87 cents for every dollar a man makes, but its visible minority, it is 67 cents. Women with children also make less than those who don't. Men with children actually make more than their peers without them. Can you tell us about how these intersection inequalities, more than just comparing men and women, will be addressed?
Yes, indeed. And thank you for the question, Madam Chair. We believe that the proactive pay equity regime is particularly likely to benefit women with intersecting identities, such as newcomer women, racialized women, Indigenous women, and women with disabilities. Research indicates that women with intersecting identities face larger wage gaps, as the member has pointed out, due to, for example, part-time employment, precarious work, occupational segregation, social norms, stereotypes, and unconscious bias. As part of our engagement strategy, the Commission is engaging with diverse women to better understand how intersectional factors affect their economic outcomes. But we do know that when women with intersecting identities are part of predominantly female work categories, they will be, the employers are now required to look at the value of that work and compare it to the value of work done predominantly by men.
Very good. I'm sorry, that's your time for that question. Madame Larouche, 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jensen. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilbert, for taking the time to be with us this morning for such an important law for the feminist cause in Canada. We noted in your preliminary remarks that the figures or the gaps are still very significant. You talked about racialized women, Indigenous women, and disabled women. The gap is still very big. So you talked about proactivity and you talked about tools, these guidelines. What can we find in these tools? What is available? It is pleasure for me to talk about our tools. At this time, we're busy developing some very interesting tools that will help small employers as well as small and medium-sized employers to help them develop their pay equity plans. So we have a tool that's very interesting that is Excel-based. Employers will be able to enter their data regarding the employment categories, and the tool will do the calculation to measure whether there is a pay gap, and if there is, how much it is, and how much money would be necessary to bridge the gap. It'll be a very effective tool, a very important tool for employers to use when they develop their pay equity plan, which is very challenging. In addition, we're developing guidelines for employers and for trade unions. And this to explain the techniques, the methodology in the Act, which is sometimes difficult to understand. We also have a legislative guide in very clear, simple language, explains the requirements of the legislation and provides examples as to how you must comply with the Act, and some very concrete examples are given. Moreover, we're also developing educational materials. So we can visit employers, provide some training so that employers all across Canada are well equipped with the necessary materials and tools to understand their obligations pursuant to the Act. Madame Larouche.
Comme ça, c'est mieux? Bonjour.
Oui, c'est mieux, merci.
Is this better? Yes, thank you. So these are tools that will be very helpful because, as you say, the Act goes back to 2018, but we're now in 2021, and we'd like to see the Act enforced. You talked in your introductory remarks about certain bias and myths. What did you mean by that, and how has that delayed the implementation of the Act? Clearly, the concept of pay equity is based on the fact that there are myths regarding the value of the work performed by women in the workplace. But I wouldn't say that myths and stereotypes have an impact on the implementation of the Act. Rather, what I would say is that we're really preparing, we're really getting ready for implementing the Act. And a part of our work is to educate employers. Employers need to understand that systemic discrimination is based on myths, stereotypes that are not intentional. We're not conscious, we're not aware of these myths, but they have come and been introduced into compensation schemes over the years. So we have to proactively evaluate our compensation systems with a view to eliminating the influences of these stereotypes on our compensation systems. Thank you. Now, you talked about a 3-year period before employers actually have to have their action plans in place. What is this 3-year period based on? Is it going to be sufficient, or might it even be shorter? How did you arrive at the 3 years, and is it realistic? The Act stipulates that each employer has 3 years to elaborate a pay equity plan. That is the choice made by Parliament when it drafted the Act. But that's the end of your time, I'm afraid. Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Jensen, just a few months ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, and they talked about pay equity. They talked about a need for it. In 77, equal pay for equal work was enshrined in the Canada Human Rights Act, but it took until 2018 to actually get pay equity legislation. And as Madame Larouche was talking about in terms of the delays, it took 3 years now to see potential regulations come into place, which we actually haven't seen yet. They continue to get pushed back and pushed back. Do you have an idea? Do you have any sort of inside knowledge? I asked the government last week whether they could say when those regulations were coming. Do you have any insight? Because they had said could be the fall, could be later. Do you happen to know anything more about when the regulations will actually come into place?
So thank you for the question, Madam Chair. The regulations were pre-published in the Canada Gazette 1, as I'm sure the member knows, on November 14th of 2020. And we, as a Pay Equity Division of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, have been actively involved in examining those regulations and working with ESDC Employment Development, ESDC Canada, to to ensure that the regulations are sound. And there was a 60-day period following the pre-publication for submissions to be made by interested parties, and I believe that was done, and that there was a significant interest in those regulations. So the process will proceed. I cannot comment on that. I am not privy to that information, nor is that my role as a Federal Pay Equity Commissioner. But I can certainly assure the member that we are actively involved in reviewing the regulations and ensuring that they're transparent and clear and understandable for Canadian business and Canadian unions to work with in the development of their pay equity plan. Those regulations are necessary to support the Act coming into force. And we do know that the government has indicated that is likely the Act will come into force later on this year.
So obviously it can be very, very frustrating. I mean, it's been 50 years, and now we're being told that it's only after those regulations are in place, whenever that may be. And I understand that has to be done well, and it's not something that you take lightly, but absolutely that this work could have potentially been done more effectively, so that women weren't waiting so long for the employers to have 3 years to draft plans, to have a potential additional 3 to 5 years to actually go forward with the implementation of those plans. We're looking at pay equity to potentially not go forward for many women until 2029, 2030. So could you talk about the significance that has in terms of, I sort of see it as a snowball effect, in terms of the longer that this takes, the longer women go without, and the longer women go without actively in terms of their paychecks, actively in terms of that equality, that human right. Can you talk about the impact of that?
Yes, thank you for that question. Most employees who are eligible to receive a pay equity adjustment will receive that adjustment the day after the posting of the pay equity plan, which is 3 years after the coming into force of the legislation. So if the Act comes into force in 2021, that will mean that in 2024, we anticipate that most women will begin to receive the pay equity adjustment if one is necessary based on the development of the plan. Under Section 61(2) of the Act, employers can phase in increases over 3 years. That's for large employers, or 5 years for smaller employers who have 10 to 99 employees. But the adjustments still have to be made starting in the 3rd year after the coming into force of the Act, and ending in either the 6th or the 8th year after the coming into force. So I would say that, yes, there's a 3-year period during which employers and unions, if a pay equity committee is required, will be working to develop a pay equity plan. And as many of the members know, the development of a pay equity plan is a complex exercise that takes time, and certainly takes time when it's being done in a committee. It will, of course, be incumbent upon employers and unions who are working in a pay equity committee to use a collaborative approach in the development of their pay equity plan, to avoid having to come to the Pay Equity Commission, to my office for assistance in resolving disputes. The more they're able to work collaboratively together, the shorter the delay, and the more likelihood that women are going to be able to get the money in an expeditious fashion.
Madam Chair, you were muted, so I think you were trying to say my time was done, but.
Yes, I was. Oh, sorry. I was eloquently saying that we were going into our second round of questionings, beginning with Ms. Shin.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate your presentations today, and and I do feel this is the right step forward. I really appreciated my other colleagues talking about their intersectionality of racialized women and the impact of the two. My question has to do with the culture and the myths and the stereotypes and the lack of, I guess, respect and dignity that is underlying the need for this Pay Equity Act. When you were, Ms. Jensen, when you were receiving those complaints that you referred to as being very painful, those litigations, when people complained, when these women complained about unequal pay, did they come because were those cases just indicative of the systemic lack of equality that our country acknowledged, like culturally, or were they specific to certain behaviors and attitudes from the workplace or the employer?
Oh, that's a very, very interesting question. Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. It really does cause me to reflect on, almost 3 decades now of work that I've been doing in the area of pay equity. And as I mentioned, I saw, the toll that this kind of litigation took on the women themselves, but also on employers who sometimes felt personally attacked that they had a discriminatory wage system in place, and that was never the intention. That was never, no one ever intentionally set out to create a system of compensation that was intentionally discriminating against women. And so there was a lot of angst and a lot of struggle around realizing that that may have crept into the compensation system, and a lot of questions about how did that happen. How in the world could we in Canada have reached this point in time where we still have systems that devalue the work that is done by women. And I guess, the way that I try to explain it to employers and to unions alike is that, it's a historical problem that has developed over time, whereby certain kinds of roles that have been undertaken by women, often in a home environment, such as the care of children, administrative duties, social duties, taking care of the family, social agenda, that kind of stuff, has been really largely taken for granted, and not acknowledged as really valuable work contributing to the economy. That is an attitude that prevailed, long time ago, and that found its way into our compensation systems, whereby the kind of work that women would do, caring for others or taking, cleaning up after a meeting, or attending to the needs of, as a clerk, attending to the needs of a superior, was seen to be something that was somehow less valuable because it came naturally to women, and that's just what women did. And so when you explain to employers that this is just something that's creeped into our system, and what we have to do now is remove from women the obligation to complain about that, and put the obligation, as we're doing with this proactive legislation, on the employers, and say, whether you think you have a problem or not, whether you ever intended to discriminate against women, which we assume you didn't, you now have to look at your compensation systems to find out if somehow discriminatory pay practices have crept in. And that's your job, and I'm going to ensure that that's done.
Very good. And now we'll go to
time?
Ms. Hutchings. No,
Thank
Ms.
you for that.
Hutchings, 5 minutes. Thanks.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to both our witnesses today, and congratulations. Ms. Jensen, on being the first federal commission, and you, Commissioner, and you, Mr. Wilbon, on being the Director General on this first active, proactive pay equity plan for our country. So thanks for the work that you've done, and thanks for the hard work that you're going to be doing. Ms. Jensen, in your opening remarks, you were chatting about the process. So can you go into a little more detail, the consultation process, and how you got to where you were, what groups you you spoke with? Where did you get into rural situations? As my colleague Ms. Wong always talks about seniors, I always talk about rural areas. So can you just give us a few lines on that, please, and the consultation process?
Absolutely. I'm very happy to do that, Madam Chair. When I first assumed this role as a pay equity commissioner in 2019, I was very eager to speak directly with all of the various people involved in the federal jurisdiction, both employers, employees, unions, as well as non-governmental organizations such as LEAF and the YWCA, um, and various other organizations that are active on behalf of women throughout Canada. And it was very, very important to me to hear what those concerns are, not just from the point of view of how are we going to implement this complicated or challenging legislation, but also, what is going to be the impact on my business? How are unions going to be able to work effectively with employers when we have a difficult bargaining relationship? What is going to change? How are you going to make this any better for us? And in particular, I wanted to hear from employee organizations about how we could get the word out so that employees across Canada, whether they were in rural settings or urban settings, how they would know about these rights. And so in response to some of the suggestions that were made by the stakeholder groups, we've been developing these tools that we hope will respond to the needs. And I've been really proactive about, for example, I did a YouTube video with a woman who organizes has a very wide audience of mums at work, and I've received enormous feedback from all over the country about from women who are mothers who were very confused about what pay equity means and how that relates to their lives and their workplaces and so on. And so I'm really committed to doing that, to using traditional media, social media, every kind of approach that I can to reach out. And we have a very well developed communications plan to ensure that we get the word out.
Great. Thank you for that answer. Ms. Jansen, I've heard from many small businesses that they do need that 3 years. So can you just comment on that and, tell us why exactly, in your professional opinion, why the businesses need this time, especially small businesses, to get caught up?
Yes, and that relates really to the previous question, which is, my consultations with small businesses and large businesses across Canada have led me to believe that even before the pandemic, there were concerns about the challenges associated with implementing pay equity. As I indicated, it's a technical exercise. For small businesses in particular, it's an exercise that's often done by someone with very little training who may be doing it off the side of their desk, so to speak. And they require enormous support to be able to do that. And we are, as a division, committed to providing that support. And Parliament decided that 3 years was the appropriate amount of time to give employers to elaborate, to develop a pay equity plan, but was also, I think, thinking that the division, and we are legislatively mandated to do this, would provide good educational support to do that. So, so we are doing that. Then, of course, the pandemic hit, and many businesses across Canada in the federal jurisdiction are struggling for their own survival. So, so this time period of 3 years is important to give those businesses a chance to get their feet back under them, economically speaking, and to get the support they need to develop their plans.
Very
And
good.
I must say,
and that's your time.
Oh.
We're going now to Madame Larouche, 2,5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to continue with the importance the Act has during this economic renewal period as we overcome the crisis where women were so much more affected by the pandemic compared to men. So to what extent can pay equity in the government regulated sector have an impact? In what way might it influence things as well in the private sector? A clarification. Do you want me to talk about the influence of pay equity on the impacts of the pandemic? I'm talking about the economic renewal period. It's not going to be important only for the federal regulated sector, but also the private sector to help women's pay and diminish the gap between men and women's pay. So what you do in the government sector, what impact could it have on the private sector? Am I to understand then what influence the government sector can have on the private sector? Yes. Implementation. Could it have a snowball effect on private business that is not governed by the Act? I believe that this Act will indeed have a great deal of influence, not only on private sector employers, under federal regulation, but even on other provinces in Canada where there is no legislation yet, no proactive pay equity legislation yet. It is very important that the government take very seriously, and I think that that is what is happening. I think that federal government is assuming its responsibility as a leader countrywide, and to implement pay equity. And I do think that will have an influence, not just on private companies, but also on private enterprises in provinces. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the positive effects of the implementation of the Act are many. There will be many positive effects. And I always dwell on the fact that we really need to begin this exercise on the basis that it is going to be good for business, it's going to be good for the workers, and it's going to be good for the economy.
It's Matheson for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. One of the things that concerns me, of course, getting back to the delays that we have seen and the continual delays, the length of time that this will take to implement, is that this is money being stolen. Ultimately, that there are women that are being impacted daily. And you know, if someone was stealing money, we wouldn't say, oh well, you can do it for another 50 years as we teach you to stop stealing money. We stop it right away. So and as you can imagine, there's an organization, the Canadian Postmasters and Assistants Association. They first filed their pay equity complaints in 1992, and it's only in 2020 that complaint has been rectified, that there's action being taken on that complaint. And in some cases, the money owed to these women are paid to their estates because they're not alive anymore. So if we could talk about potentially the delays on women too, when Ms. Wong was talking about seniors, what kind of impact does this have in the long term, that delay, on women's pensions, on their benefits, on that idea that there is a longer term cost to women specifically?
Yeah, I think that the member has very rightly underscored the reason why a complaint-based system is completely inappropriate for addressing gender inequality in wage circumstances. I know personally about those cases that the member is speaking about, and the toll that has taken, and the amount of money that has been kept from women who rightly deserve it. And so I'm only too happy that the complaint-based system is no longer going to be a reality for the vast majority of women in the federal jurisdiction, and that we will have a proactive system. There is no question that the amount of time that it takes to develop a pay equity plan and to put that in place is going to be difficult for many people who have been waiting for a long time for this legislation to come into place, and who are very much looking forward to the increases in pay that they are due. And that is without a doubt a hard thing for a lot of people to stomach. But I would say that we need to be proud of the fact that as a country, and I have represented Canada internationally, we need to be proud of the fact that we are recognized as a leader in the world for enacting this legislation and for getting on with it, and for putting in place a pay equity division of the Canadian Human Rights Commission that will support employers and unions to work collaboratively together to address the pay equity gaps, and to do so in an expeditious fashion. There are many countries where
Very
the
good.
legislation.
I'm sorry. That's the end of our time for our panel. Thank you so much to Ms. Jensen and Mr. Wilbon for being here today. Certainly, for those of you that are going to be participating in our in-camera, you're going to have to, we'll suspend the meeting and you'll have to log into the other link that was provided. So thanks to our witnesses, and we're off to our in-camera committee report consideration.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.